Good Sunday morning to you folks. Welcome back to your local election headquarters. Sitting with me now at the desk, two political analysts, Democrat Shannon Love and Republican Jake Hoffman. Thank you both for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
A lot to get to. Let's start with the Florida governor's budget. What do you think were sort of some of the most surprising or significant elements of the budget?
Well, surprising, significant. I think that this is his largest budget that he's tried to pass during his tenure. And there's actually some money allotted to the environment, which is big. And then there's money allotted to education as well. And the suggestions that he's put in, they're going to be setting him up pretty good for what he's looking to do in the future as well.
Okay.
I would say it's definitely putting Scott in a position where he is very clearly indicating that he's positioning himself for the Senate race. He's tried to restore educational spending a little bit. Despite that, it's still less than when he took office in 2011. So he's kind of made this his tout, pretending that he's the education governor, despite the fact that we're at a less of a level than we were in 2011 for education. I also think he's done some really detrimental things to affordable housing. And I think we need to be talking a lot about the $92 million that he's pulling from the affordable housing from the trust to do very similar to what the Republicans did for education with the lottery.
Interesting to see how that race shapes up and how this budget will affect that. Florida Democratic Party Chairman Stephen Bittle resigned this week after some allegations of sexually inappropriate behavior. What do you make of this? Shannon, obviously we'll start with you.
Yeah. You know, I was talking to you after the Lavala story broke. I spoke to Paul Mueller. It doesn't surprise me at all. He had a segment on, the sexual harassment allegations. I think it's a prevalent thing on both sides of the aisle. I think it's also really telling that, there's a lot of concerns that people had about him going in, and there's been some mistakes he made along the way. I think, our party is trying really hard to crack down and hold ourselves accountable for not only the fact that we are the progressive platform that's really big on making sure that women, have that space and that safe advancement, and I think they're trying to own that.
Well, despite what both sides are trying to do and make it a political issue, it is truly bipartisan. I mean, we've now seen,
absolutely.
I don't think sexual assault or sexual harassment lies on one side of the aisle.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, you see it on both sides of the party like you're talking about. And as you said, the progressives would like to jump ahead of this in the future and be the ones that come out and take hard stances on allegations like that.
Yeah, I imagine that will be weaponized, I think, in some upcoming races. All right, a lot of sexual assault and harassment accusations. We saw this week that Democratic Senator Al Franken was accused of inappropriate sexual misconduct. Obviously, Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore, ongoing allegations now, 9 women who are coming out against him. All right, so first of all, Shannon, how badly does this hurt the Democrats? Do you think that Franken will be forced to resign?
I don't know. I think it's an interesting case. I think that Franken should really reevaluate whether or not he wants to run for president in 2020. I think there's a serious conversation Democrats are having in Minnesota. The Democratic Party, I think it's called the DPL. The Minnesota Democratic Party actually put into place a policy where they were actually doing sexual harassment training for any candidate who receives party funds. So I think they're definitely taking some steps to address it. I think it may be time for him to consider, when he's going to be done in the Senate and at least kind of maybe not running for re-election. I think it's a really interesting conversation that both sides need to own up to. And
yeah. Absolutely, and I think I do worry here that there's some false equivalency going on, though. I mean, we've had one woman come out against Al Franken for some, frankly, sophomoric behavior.
Absolutely. And
inappropriate. I mean, an unwanted kiss. I'm not sure that really is the same thing, though, as 9 women accusing Roy Moore of various degrees of sexual assault, including with at least one who may be younger than a legal age at that time.
Sure, and it is really important to not paint a broad stroke over everything that you see out in the media. I mean, each case should be looked at individually. Like you said, there's definitely levels to the allegations.
Absolutely. I think we need to talk about the fact that, with Al Franken, you have a senator who had one allegation with a woman who maybe it might have been a power struggle, a bad positioning of power, but the woman said, was consensual, like relatively consensual, things like that. But then you have the Moore situation where it's multiple women, where it's, you know, he was looking after children for their parents and then asked them on dates.
Well, and let's be honest, there was nothing consensual about that kiss, according to Leanne Tweeden. She said that, you know, they were engaging in a skit or practicing for a skit, and that he was sort of badgering her, and then at some point came forward to kiss him, and in a way that she didn't want to. And then of course that picture of him, you know, with his hands above her breast and, you know, mocking like he was groping her.
That is why it is a serious situation.
Sure.
And
I think you're right that this could have a huge impact. I mean, I think Franken was being whispered about as a presidential candidate, and that this could have a huge impact.
And to the Republicans' credit, I mean, the leadership in the party has pulled the funding for Roy Moore. They are not looking to endorse him. Different senators are pulling away. They are not standing behind Roy Moore, and they're not the party in the past to have been the progressive on things like this, and we're really looking as Republicans to take the step forward and lead the charge against.
But I don't think you can say that the Republican Party is taking a lead on it when you have Donald Trump, who has, what is it now, 16, 17 allegations
16
of
allegations.
and nothing has been addressed.
Yeah, and I will say this, I think people are now starting to take a fresh look at some of these older allegations. People now want to see what's going on with those people who are accusing Donald Trump of sexual assault, and Bill Clinton as well. I think people are now looking at whether or not, there was some things that he did that were inappropriate back when he was the president and even since. So thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Stay with us, folks. We will be right back with a report from Tallahassee on what's happening in the state capitol this week.